Then we have some sympathetic chain ganglia. All this really means is that it's just a bundle of sensory neuron cell bodies that are outside the central nervous system. So these ganglia are going to be kind of interwoven around the spine almost. And so there's kind of be, you'll have a few different regions, but basically if you see like a bunch of yellow lumps throughout and I'm asking, what is this? You can tell me it's the sympathetic chain ganglia. So that's what these little yellow lumps are. They're just clusters of neuron cell bodies. These can be rather painful if pinched, but regardless. Now we can move on to some sensory information. This is the technical start of page 33 with our special senses lecture. A lot of this anatomy we cover in lecture. We'll make sure I reiterate that again, and some of the flow as well, some of the things that'll matter for how we process vision and hear things. So starting off, we have our external eye. We'll have extrinsic eye muscles. So any muscle on the outside here, we can call that an extrinsic eye muscle. Okay. The palpebrae, or the palpebrae conjunctiva, is basically this clear membrane that's going to coat the inside of the eyelid and protect and lubricate the eyelid. So this palpebra conjunctiva is basically this white layer that surrounds the eyelid. It's what gives your eye the white. The conjunctiva itself is going to be this layer underneath that palpebral conjunctiva, covers the sclera itself. Again, it'll help with protection and lubrication. So they're basically the same thing, just two different layers. Palpebra conjunctiva on the outside, conjunctiva more toward the inside. Then we have our lacrimal gland. This is going to help produce tears. So this would be the left eye. Yes. So this would be the left eye. And so if you feel on your left eye toward the inside, you can feel your lacrimal sac. And then underneath that would be the lacrimal duct and the nasolacrimal duct. So the lacrimal sac is going to be where the storage for overflow of tears will be. So the lacrimal gland is going to produce those tears, and those will run medially from the outside in to the lacrimal sac where it will catch. And then nasolacrimal duct will carry the tears from the sac to the nasal cavity. This is why when you cry, sometimes you start getting the sniffles too, because those tears are running through your nose. Or maybe when you go outside and it's really cold out and it makes your eyes water and then your nose starts running on top of that. It's a combination of that and all the cilia in your nose that would normally carry the mucus freezing up. With the internal eye, we can look at a bunch of different structures here. So colored red, but it's actually white, is our sclera. So we can see this outside. So on the right on the outside of the sclera would be the conjunctiva. Okay, and then outside that, the conjunctiva palpebra, or palpebral conjunctiva, whichever way you want to say it. The sclera is going to help protect the eye. It'll be that white of the eye. Cornea is colored blue here. This is actually going to be translucent though, so that we can permit the entrance of light. So the cornea is going to help get light into the eye. Be nice and translucent for us. Our choroid is going to be colored black, so you can see our black layer, and this is actually anatomically accurate because when we do the dissection of the sheep eye or cow eye in lab, this layer is black to be reflective, to help reflect light in the right spot. And this will contain blood vessels to supply the eye with nutrients. The ciliary body is going to be an extension of the choroid, so the choroid keeps going, and then the ciliary body in extension of the sclera and choroid here, the ciliary body is going to contract muscularly. It's a smooth muscle to move this lens here. Okay, so this lens will help refract light and focus light on our fovea centralis, which is part of the macula. So our fovea centralis gets light bounced onto it by the lens. Our iris is this blacker, it's like this dark green colored here. That will be what gives different eyes different colors, which is influenced by different genes. So you can have blue eyes, brown eyes, hazel eyes. That is the iris that you're seeing, and that will control light that is entering the eye. Just like this ciliary body is going to contract in order to help bounce light onto the fovea centralis. your iris is going to either dilate or constrict in order to allow a certain amount of light in based on how bright it is outside. Your pupil is literally just a region. It looks like this black dot, it looks like a structure, but it actually is not. The black is what you're seeing in the back of the eye here of this retina. All right. So I just realized I totally said that the choroid was black here. Right outside that is the choroid, this yellow. So it's colored black here, but it's actually yellow. The retina is what's black here, and that's not anatomically accurate. The choroid is actually anatomically black. That's sorry for any confusion there. The choroid is what is yellow here, and that is what is going to be containing the blood vessels, whereas the retina is going to have this very, very thin film layer of photoreceptor layers that we talk about in lecture a little bit more. The internal eye is going to be consistent of the things that we just kind of talked about, but a little bit more in detail. So our retina, again, this black layer, will sense light and send that signal to the brain via the optic nerve. Okay. So our macula lutea is basically used for sharp vision. Vision, not visone. Sorry, spelling error. Vision. It's going to be this region of the back of the eye that it's bigger than the fovea centralis, because the fovea centralis is going to be the center of our macula lutea. But sharp vision will just consist of a bunch of rods outside the macula, or outside of the fovea centralis, and then our fovea centralis is going to be at the dead center of that macula lutea, consisting only of cones for the sharpest vision acuity. And then that signal will transmit to the optic disc, which is simply a region. It's basically an opening. There's no retina there, no choroid there either, and so it just ends up making contact with this nerve that's continuous. So there's no photoreceptors here, so that's where your blind spot exists for when you're looking somewhere and you might not actually see something. Your brain will fill in the gaps there. That could be a little bit more of like a psychology class if you want to get into that a little bit more, but this is where your blind spot occurs. And then that signal will travel via the optic nerve to the brain. So sends the signal to the brain. That's your optic nerve. And then your anterior cavity is going to be the front of the iris. Okay, so we see our cornea and then our iris. This cavity here is called our anterior cavity, and that contains the aqueous humor. So just think of it as water. Just silly water in there. Humor. It's just a bunch of water in there, and that just maintains pressure and shape of the eyeball. And same thing with this posterior cavity. It's the same thing, just on the other side of the lens. Maintains our round eye shape so it doesn't flatten out, and it can make sure our visual acuity is on par. So that is the eyeball. Next we have our ear. So looking externally, we have our auricle, also known as the pinna. You can put either. Auricle is more anatomically prevalent as of recent. Pinna will be in the literature from older text. Then we have our external auditory canal, or external auditory meatus. Either works. It's basically your ear canal. So everything from the outside of your ear is called the pinna, and then that tube coming in is the external auditory canal. Even though it's kind of inside your brain or inside your head already, it's not technically part of hearing, so we're going to call it external. In the middle ear, we're going to have a few different structures here. We'll have our tympanic membrane. Sometimes you'll see that as part of the external ear as well. We're going to call it as part of the middle ear. This tympanic membrane is your eardrum. So it's very painful to puncture this. And little kids, when they get tubes in their ears, it's because fluid keeps getting built up in the middle ear and infections keep occurring. So in order to let that liquid come out, they'll put little tubes, just like very, very tiny tubes, in the eardrum itself to let liquid come out. All right. And then we have our middle ear ossicles. So this, the sound waves being guided into the ear via the pinna, and then the external auditory canal, make way onto the tympanic membrane that vibrates onto the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. So malleus, incus, stapes. That's the order. The stapes then attaches to the oval window of the oval window of the cochlea. So our cochlea is going to transmit that sound throughout and then transmit that onto its round window to leave But before it does that, it will make contact with specific nerves in the cochlear nerve to send a signal to the brain for audition. So the round window is where sound waves will exit so that we can depressurize, and the eustachian tube is what controls pressure in your ears when you are too high up or too low. Pressure changes inside your ears will change, and blowing, like holding your nose and blowing in your ears, that's popping your ears per se. That's expanding the air within your eustachian tube to help equalize the pressure within your middle ear. And then lastly, we have our inner ear. Not too much what we're going to go over here anatomically. We go through a lot more in lecture, so hopefully this is relatively easy compared to lecture. Our semicircular canals are going to be located on top of a vestibule here. So we would have our cochlea, which is this spiral snail-looking dude, and what would look like the head of the snail, that would be our vestibule. And then the little ears or lobes coming off of the head of the snail, those are the semicircular canals, and there are 3 of them. You don't need to know the 3 of them. You need to know that there are 3 and that they are the semicircular canals. And then this is the vestibule. The vestibular nerve would be coming off of that. And the cochlea has its own nerve, and those nerves would conjoin together to become the vestibulocochlear nerve to transmit that information to the brain. So you just need to know that there are 2 nerves that just end up transmitting to the same regions of the brain for the most part. A lot of the vestibular nerve is going to go to the cerebellum of the brain for helping with balance and coordination, understanding your body and your proprioception. Whereas the cochlear nerve, right, your hearing, we talked about this last week, is mostly going to go to the temporal lobe for audition or hearing perception. But that is actually it for our sensation and perception type lab. If you have any questions, please email me. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.